We're looking at something in the range of $10.4 billion. To put that in context, that is about the same amount of damage as we suffered in the Loma Prieta earthquake. And it's a great plume of moisture that comes out of the South Pacific, heads up toward the Northern California coast, and it brings enormous amounts of moisture. The storm that we're talking about in our study would have the equivalent of maybe 10 Mississippi rivers worth of moisture in it. Think about all the infrastructure we have around the bay. We've got lots of businesses, lots of buildings. We have our airports. We have wastewater treatment facilities. We've got highways. Most of those are low-lying and they're around the bay. So we would be looking at prolonged disruption of transportation, businesses closed, airports affected, just to start. We're looking at something in the range of $10.4 billion, and that is a lot of property damage, disruption of transportation. To put that in context, that is about the same amount of damage as we suffered in the Loma Prieta earthquake. Every county would be affected to some degree, but it would be concentrated primarily in the low-lying areas of Santa Clara County and San Mateo County. So we've got a lot of assets there. We've got SFO, we have wastewater treatment plants, we have all of the industry and office activity around the South Bay and Silicon Valley. And those are very low-lying areas. Actually, many of them are the South Bay are subsided areas because the land has dropped due to various kinds of man-made activity. And they're protected right now by some very old levees that were mostly built a long time ago for salt ponds that really don't meet modern engineering standards. So we think that's a conservative number because, well, we haven't tried to factor in the loss of life. And one of the big factors we haven't factored in is what would happen in the Delta if during a large storm the levees were to fail. Now we know at the risk of earthquakes, they're also at risk of a lot of water moving through in a storm, and they have failed in the past. A lot of our water supply is linked to the Delta. Now, if you have sea level rise, then that just exacerbates the problem. And pretty much everybody agrees sea level rise is happening, it's on the way. We're going to see more over the next 10, 20, 30 years and beyond. And when that happens, it means that the level of the bay is higher. As the water is trying to come down out of those hills, it's washing toward the bay, it's going to back up into neighborhoods, and it's going to help raise the overall level of the bay between the storm, king tide, very low atmospheric pressure, pushes the water up. You add sea level rise in, the impacts that we've come up with in these studies are very, very conservative. The impact could be much greater depending on the level of sea level rise, how quickly it rises, and when that next storm happens. Yeah, we are in the middle of an enormous drought, but it's important to remember that if you think about average rainfall in California, there is average rainfall, there is no average year. We know that the weather in the state is extremely volatile. It can spike way up and way below. We have had a history in California of a mega flood, an enormous rain event occurring every 150 to 200 years. We're about 150 years into that cycle. So even though we're in a drought now, we need to be prepared for the day that may well come when we have something like a Hurricane Sandy or a Hurricane Katrina here in the Bay Area. Every part of the Bay is going to have a somewhat different answer. However, we know that we're going to need to reinforce levees. There is hardscape, there are seawalls, San Francisco, for example, that are going to need to be raised or reinforced. Areas that have wetlands, there's a special opportunity to design and restore wetlands because they're actually a terrific buffer against the movement of wind and water, and it's a natural solution to what's going to be a long-term problem. Infrastructure for flooding is something that people take for granted. It's invisible to most of us. We only become aware of it when a big event happens, and then we use it, we benefit from it. So I think we need to recognize that although it's invisible, it's very, very important. And we need to think now about how to invest for the future so that we're all protected.